Hello everyone, myself Dr. Vinay Gandal from KMC College Khopoli. Today I am going to talk about formulation of hypothesis. Dear student, as you know that formulation of hypothesis is very important task of research activity. Without formulating hypothesis and without testing hypothesis, research cannot be completed. So it is very necessary for all researcher to formulate hypothesis which is more relevant to the research problem. And the hypothesis is normally used to study problem statement of the research work. So in this lecture, today we have to discuss these various points. We have to learn meaning of hypothesis, different types of hypothesis, forms of relationship in hypothesis, and we have to understand how to formulate research hypothesis. Dear students, formulation of hypothesis is very important from researcher's point of view. So researcher need to consider different variables to undertake study and formulate research hypothesis. Okay, let's see the meaning of hypothesis. Dear students, hypothesis is a assumption or it is a predetermined statement about the fact or study. Normally, whatever study researcher need to undertake in a near future, he is required to make a predetermined statement about the facts. Means, while undertaking research activity, we have to choose any one way of study, and depending upon the different variables and proper direction, researcher need to consider some assumptions or statements which is normally predetermined about the fact. It is the assumption, but it is a tentative assumption which is more related to the problem statement. And based on such a tentative assumptions, researcher need to test the assumption or test the hypothesis, and its result may be different, either accepted or rejected, but there is a need to write a tentative assumption regarding problem statement of the study. Hypothesis is also known as it is a process of selecting one way of research study where one has to select a statement which is decided in advance about the fact of the study. Normally in research activity, null hypothesis is used. There are two types of hypothesis normally we can use in research work, that is null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Okay, null hypothesis is to be used for research study, and that hypothesis must be tested after data collection. So this is the another step that is called as a testing of hypothesis. But for your kind information, hypothesis must be tested, and normally null hypothesis is to be used to undertake effective research work. Okay. Now let's see different types of hypothesis. As you know that there are main two types of hypothesis, null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. So now we have to understand what actually null hypothesis is. When hypothesis is stated negatively, then it is called as a null hypothesis. Or whatever negative statement is made or assumption is made by the researcher regarding the fact of the study is also known as a null hypothesis. And normally it is written like this: it is like no difference or no relationship or no association between the parameters or variables of the study that are to be selected in the entire research work. Okay, so for testing hypothesis there must be use of some parameters or variables, either it may be dependent or independent. But if we are stating there is no difference or there is no relationship or no association between these variables, so that type of hypothesis is known as null hypothesis. And normally it is represented as H0. Means while writing hypothesis in the research report, we have to write H0 as a null hypothesis. For example, this is one example of null hypothesis. There is no relationship between planning and financial performance of manufacturing company. So this hypothesis state a negative or no relationship between planning and financial performance. So it is stated as a negative. That's why it is known as null hypothesis. And normally null hypotheses are to be used to undertake research study. Okay. Now second type of hypothesis is alternative hypothesis. So alternative hypothesis describes the researcher's prediction about the research problem or parameter or variable used in the study. And it is exactly opposite of null hypothesis. So alternate hypothesis is the hypothesis or assumption regarding research problem or parameters or variable used in the study, and it is the only prediction of researcher. So when we use null hypothesis to undertake a study, we must have alternate hypothesis. So if null hypothesis, if study fails to accept null hypothesis, then we have to accept alternate hypothesis. Or if null hypothesis is rejected, then we have to accept alternate hypothesis. So there must be always alternate hypothesis in the study. For example, there is a relationship or association between planning and financial performance of manufacturing company. So it is shown as a positive relationship between planning and financial performance. It is exactly opposite of null hypothesis. Okay, so this hypothesis state as a proper relationship or positive relationship among two variables or different parameters used in the study, and which is popularly known as alternative hypothesis. Okay, now we have to understand some other types of hypotheses that are to be also used while undertaking a research work. So researcher need to understand other types of hypothesis also. First one is descriptive hypothesis. This is the hypothesis that describes the characteristics like size, forms, or distribution of variables which are used in the study. Or when researcher undertaking a descriptive research, like research based on observation, actual fact finding process. So in that case, the descriptive hypothesis also used to understand or to study the problem statement. So, in the case of descriptive research, variables may be an object, it may be a person, it may be an organization, situation, or event. Whenever researcher want to undertake research with relation to object or person, organization, situation, or event, that type of research is known as descriptive research, and whatever hypothesis researcher need to formulate is comes under the category of descriptive hypothesis. It may be either null or alternate. So there must be a null hypothesis as well as alternate hypothesis in descriptive research also. For example, personal counseling helps to develop personality. So this type of hypothesis is related with the with the development of personality and personal counseling, and it is related with a person. So this is an a descriptive study, and such a alternate hypothesis has been used by the researcher in his descriptive research. Okay. Next, other types of hypothesis is rational hypothesis. When there is a relationship between different variables, then we have to consider rational hypothesis. It is also known as explanatory hypothesis. Rational hypothesis describes the relationship between two variables, and such a relationship may be positive, negative, or causal. So, based on relationship between different variables, either it may be dependent or independent or different parameters used in the study. So, whatever relationship is there, either positive, negative, or causal, and whatever hypothesis researcher need to use to understand the relationship between two variables is known as a rational hypothesis. Okay. Next type is causal hypothesis. Normally causal hypothesis states the existence of or change in one variable causes or leads to an effect of another variable. Means whenever one variable make an effect, either it may be positive or negative impact on other variables, so such study is called as a causal research study. And under this, whatever hypothesis researcher needed to formulate called as causal hypothesis. So in this case, or in the case of causal hypothesis, first variable is known as independent variable and another is known as dependent variable. For example, there is one hypothesis, that is effect of monetary benefits on working performance of employee. So there is a relationship between monetary benefits and working performance. So while understanding different variables, relationship between different variables, in this example, there are two types of two variable, that is monetary benefits and working performance. So the working performance is based on monetary benefits. So whenever one variable affect another variable, so in that case, whatever assumptions researcher need to formulate is known as causal hypothesis, and it is also important from the researcher's point of view. Okay. Next hypothesis is simple hypothesis. Normally, this is an simple hypothesis which shows the relationship between one dependent variable and single independent variable. Means there is no different types of variables, only the relationship between one dependent and one independent variable. In this case, whatever hypothesis we have to design are called as simple hypothesis. Another number of types of hypothesis is known as complex hypothesis. Normally, these hypotheses shows the relationship between two or more dependent as well as and two and more independent variables. There may be a chance of a number of variables in one research study. So wherever there is a different or number of dependent and number of independent variables, and whenever we are testing the relationship between these variables, so we have to formulate complex hypothesis. Okay. Next hypothesis is directional hypothesis. This hypothesis gives the direction to study the problem statement. It predicts the direction either positive or negative. For example, there is no positive relationship between moral values and social values. In this example, in this hypothesis, it shows directly positive relationship between two variables. So it gives a proper direction because there is a relationship. That is, there is a positive relationship indicating a exact direction towards positiveness between the relationship between moral values and social values. Okay. Another type of hypothesis is a non-directional hypothesis. Normally, it does not predict a specific direction, but there is a relationship. Means there is a relationship between two variables, but it does not shows the proper direction or specific direction like positive or negative. Means whenever we are unknown about the relationship between two different variables, we are known about the relationship, there is a relationship between two variables, but we are not getting proper idea about the direction of relationship. In that case, whatever assumption researcher need to design, that is known as non-directional hypothesis. Okay, let's see different forms of relationship. Means there is necessary, or it is very necessary for the researcher to understand the relationship between two variables. For example, here is x is independent variable and y is a dependent variable. So there is a two types of relationship, directional and non-directional. Okay, in the case of directional relationship, there is a relationship between these two, that is x and y variable. And if there is a relationship, in this case the relationship either it may be positive or negative, but there should be a direction of relationship. If relationship is positive between x and y, for example, if x goes up then y goes up, it is known as positive relationship. If x increases then y decreases, it shows negative relationship. Means there is a direction. Okay, whatever, either positive or negative, if there is a direction, that is called as directional relationship between different variables. What about non-directional relationship? There is a relationship between x and y. It may be positive or negative. If we are not well known about the direction of relationship, then such a relationship is known as non-directional and is used to understand the or to test the hypothesis as decided by researcher. Okay, last point, that is how to formulate hypothesis. Dear students, it is very important from researcher's point of view to write hypothesis in his research report. Even for determination or formulation of hypothesis, researcher need to understand the some concepts of formulating hypothesis, and he is required to test all these hypotheses after collection of data. But before that, there should be a proper formulation of hypothesis. So these are the some examples of writing a proper hypothesis. Example number one is related with relationship between two variables. So H0, that it is null hypothesis, is there is a no relationship between planning and financial performance. When we used null hypothesis to undertake a study, we must have to develop alternate hypothesis. In this case, alternate hypothesis is there is a relationship between planning and financial performance, and it is indicated as a H1. Normally, null hypothesis states the negative relationship. Okay. Second example, that is awareness about GST does not helps to reduce compliance cost. Okay. This is null hypothesis, and alternate hypothesis for this study is awareness about GST helps to reduce compliance cost. So dear students, formulation of hypothesis is very much important from research point of view, and without formulating and testing of hypothesis, research work cannot be completed. So researcher always need to formulate a proper hypothesis which is more relevant to the problem statement or problem study. Thank you.